Good day. How is everyone doing? My name is John Armwood, and I'm making this video for my YouTube channel. I'm going to be discussing in a series of videos the intersection of technology, culture, and the American social and political system in the second decade of the 21st century. A lot has been going on in the last few years, and particularly the last two. We've been seeing really since 1995 an exponential growth in the influence of technology in our society. And it's something that we're all affected by. Um, Smartphones, artificial intelligence in our homes, Google Assistants, Alexas, um, the media, television, cable, live streaming, all of these things have impacted us. Computers now that we walk around with every day are more powerful than the computers that took men to the moon in 1969 and in the early 70s. So, what I want to talk about is how the confluence of these technologies has impacted our everyday lives. We have a president now who uses Twitter as a way of communicating with the American public. This is new. The previous president, President Obama, revolutionized how social media could be used in a campaign and how the internet could be used to gather data to target campaigning. This president has revolutionized the way president communicates with the audience by bypassing the traditional mainstream media and going directly to his audience, to his base through Twitter. This, of course, has raised the issue of truth telling, of fake news, of literal falsehoods that this president has been consistently accused of, and in which fact checking organizations have repeatedly substantiated. So, in this video, we're going to be looking at the impacts of this. We're going to be discussing issues like the separation of families at the border, the sacrifice of DACA students, the rise of racism, and how the social media and technology have impacted that and given platforms. Just recently this week, we looked at stories in the media about how Facebook founder Zuckerberg was defending not taking down hate speech. I was part of a discussion about that because in countries like Canada and throughout the European Union, hate speech, which disparages a group as a whole, is illegal. Though in the United States it's protected up until the extent that it incites people to immediate violence. Some of us have issues with the American First Amendment, and I'll discuss that. I'm shaped by what happened to me as a child, where the N word was used to me repeatedly in schools. I was the only black kid in my class from third grade to the 12th grade, and particularly in high school, but starting really in the third grade, the N word was used against me, and it was chanted at me at high school. And continuing, it's important that you press the subscribe button and like the video if you like it, and I hope you do. The politics of the Trump administration, I believe, especially when it comes to human rights, are a reflection not just of Trump as an individual, but a reflection of a cycle of events which has happened in American history, really dating back to the 1600s during the initial colonization by Europeans of the eastern United States. I'm thinking particularly of the Virginia colony. During the 1600s, from in Jamestown and the surrounding colony, you had both slave labor after 1619 and poor whites working largely as indentured servants, though the Africans had been kidnapped and brought to this country against their will. The poor white workers, some of them came from prisons, some were just debtors in debtor prison, some were criminals, and others were just poor people looking for a new life. They worked usually 7-year terms as indentured servants, but the conditions they worked under were horrible, and it was basically slavery. By any other name, it was slavery. And what happened in 1676 was a rebellion. Both white and black workers were working together, intermarrying together, living together, and jointly they rebelled, led by a white man by the name of Bacon in 1676. The rebellion was put down by the wealthy Virginia planters, and after the rebellion, certain changes were made. The white working class was given the right to buy land for the first time, and the Africans who were there were not given that right, and that status was changed to that of permanent slavery. In other words, a caste system was created, and the concept of whiteness as we know it in the Americas was born. Before that, there was not a white race. The term race is a fictional term. It's a political term, and it has no biologic basis for it. And what they did was use the coloration of skin to make a caste distinction. And they divided the white working class from the black workers, all working on the farms, and gave white people something to look down upon so they could identify more with their rich brethren than their workers, black workers who were in the same economic strata. That distinction based upon caste is one that was enshrined in law in 1676. It carries through after the American Revolution. It was recognized in the U.S. Constitution with the infamous Three-Fifths Clause. It carried on to the Civil War. After the Civil War, slavery based upon caste was legally ended, but slavery did not end. Many people were freed, but if you read the 13th Amendment, there's an exemption for those in involuntary servitude, meaning those who have been accused and convicted of a crime. What happened, particularly in the South, was that after the end of Reconstruction in 1676, the war ended, the Civil War ended in 1865. At the end of Reconstruction in 1676, the troops were removed from the South after the Tilden Hayes election as part of a deal. Tilden had won the popular vote, Rutherford Hayes had won the Electoral College, and the South had threatened to lead the nation again. A deal was made that Rutherford Hayes would be not allowed to be president without contest, and the Northern troops that had occupied the South after the Civil War were removed. They were sent west to clear the land for settlement, the native lands owned and lived in by the indigenous Americans, so-called Indians, who were moved, being pushed out gradually from the East Coast. And this movement pushing them westward had been going on, most famously with Andrew Jackson in the Trail of Tears, where the Cherokee were moved out of the Carolinas and northern Georgia and made to walk all the way to Oklahoma. They were given poison blankets. Large numbers died. Over 10,000 died. It was a massacre. Andrew Jackson had defied the Supreme Court, which said the removal was a violation of the treaties between the Cherokee and the U.S. government. Andrew Jackson ignored the Supreme Court and went ahead and moved them. Now, irony of ironies, of course, when President Trump was elected, Steve Bannon advised him to put a picture of Andrew Jackson behind his desk. As you can see, there are great parallels between his treatment of Native American peoples, we call now Mexicans and Central Americans, and Andrew Jackson's treatment of Native American peoples. They both committed crimes against humanity in that era. So what we're seeing here is cyclical. We saw the cycle in the 1670s where the progress that was racial integration, it was rolled back. Slavery was made a permanent status, and white workers were given the right to buy land. We made some progress during the Civil War and through the period of Reconstruction from 1865 to roughly 1876. Then we saw that progress rolled back, and we saw another wave or attempted wave of progress during the 1880s in the populist movement, led by people like Tom Watson, who came from Georgia. But by the end of the 19th century, Watson had become an arch segregationist in support of the Ku Klux Klan. And the era of progress under early populism was over. And we didn't see progress again until the 1950s and 1960s with the civil rights movement. So we're seeing a continuing cycle of progress and regression. Progress and regression. The latest regression started in 1980 with the election of Ronald Reagan, who ran and announced his run for the presidency outside of Philadelphia, Mississippi, where 3 civil rights workers were murdered back in that infamous summer of 1964. So we've seen this cycle. I like to call it a Sisyphean cycle. For those of you who know the ancient Greek myth of Sisyphus and Albert Camus' book of the same name, where a king in ancient Greece, was condemned to go to hell for his acts. And his hell was he had to roll a rock up a hill and see it roll back down in perpetuity forever. And racial and social progress in America has been like that rock. We make progress and it goes down, it goes backwards. We make progress and it goes backwards. The form changes, and I would argue this is a direct result of technological advances. Slavery was no longer in mass economically efficient because the North was industrializing and they didn't want the competition from black workers. But at the same time, after the 13th Amendment was passed, slavery was still practiced up and really until 1942. And it was practiced by what was called peonage. If you were charged with the crime, you could be hired out or rented out as a worker in a farm, in a coal mine. And many of these people died because the owners of those farms didn't have a vested interest in any particular person because they were leasing them. So they were allowed to die. And many, many people died. There's a wonderful PBS documentary on this called Slavery by Another Name. And there's also a book that you can get on Amazon. I have it. It's called Slavery by Another Name, which discusses this. Peonage slavery in the United States did not end until January of 1942 as a direct result of the Japanese attack at Pearl Harbor. The Attorney General of the United States under Roosevelt in 1941, December of 1941, 2 weeks after the attack, issued Circular 3691, which described slavery as continuing in America under the name of peonage, and he directed all U.S. attorneys to prosecute peonage as slavery. And the last prosecution for slavery in the United States was early in 1942, and I believe it was in the state of Texas. Hey, we're going to stop for a while. I've given you a lot to digest. Make sure that you like this video. Please subscribe to the channel, and we will be continuing. Have a good day. Have a good fun. And as I always say, resistance is not futile. And those of you may know, I'm paraphrasing the Borg, the Star Trek characters that emerged in the Next Generation and went through a number of the films and the rest of the Star Trek shows that were subsequent to that time point, Voyager, Deep Space Nine, etc. So I look at Trump as being like the Borg, and I say resistance is not futile. And I will leave you there, and we'll be back in the next video. Thank you.